My name is Camila Torres, and I am 31 years old, and I was married for approximately 4 hours before my family turned my wedding into something I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe to people who weren't there. But first, the morning. I woke at 4:53. I lay still for 11 minutes before I let myself move. Not because I was nervous, not the way brides are supposed to be nervous, the pleasant flutter and coffee with bridesmaids and something borrowed, something blue version of nerves. I lay still because I had learned, over the previous 14 months, that the first minutes after waking were the ones that told me what kind of day my body had decided to have. 14 months since the diagnosis. 8 months since the last round of treatment. 6 weeks since Dr. Anand had sat across from me in her office on Sutter Street in Sacramento and used the word remission in a sentence that also had my name in it. I pressed my palm flat against my sternum and counted to 10. Good. Steady. Present. I sat up. The hotel room was still gray-dark, the curtains blocking the early October light, and I could hear, distantly through the cracked window, the low rush of the American River, that particular sound Sacramento mornings carry in the fall when the air is cool enough to move. On the nightstand, beside my water glass and my phone and the small travel case I had packed with the precision of someone who had learned not to leave medical necessities to memory, was a manila envelope. Not the important one. I want to be clear about that. This one held my copy of the amended operating agreement my grandfather had walked me through 6 weeks earlier, sitting across from Claire Ashworth's desk on L Street, while I was still processing the word remission, and the fact that my body had decided, finally, to stop fighting a war against itself and start letting me live in it again. My grandfather had handed me a copy and said, "You should keep one wherever you feel safest." I had put it in my wedding overnight bag without quite deciding why, and it had been there through the rehearsal dinner and the long, quiet evening after, and I could see it now in the gray dark of the hotel room, and I looked at it for a moment and then I looked away. There was other work to do first. My name is Camila Torres. I am 31 years old, and I am an architect. And the morning of my wedding, I woke up and pressed my hand to my own heartbeat and counted to 10 and felt it hold steady, and then I got up to get married. If you've ever sat at a family table where someone said the wrong thing out loud and everyone looked at their plate, this one's for you. Stay with me. My bridesmaids arrived at 6. Colton's sister Waverly, who was 26 and constitutionally incapable of being on time for anything except moments that required her to be present for someone she loved, was the first one through the door. She had a rolling cart from the hotel breakfast service and a paper bag from the coffee place 3 blocks away, and she set both of them down and looked at me standing in my robe by the window and said, "You look annoyingly calm." "I've had a lot of practice," I said. She hugged me, which she did the way she did everything, fully, without warning, no performance in it. Junie came next, then Rosamund, and then the room had the quality of itself. The particular warmth of people who know each other past the point of performing, who have been through enough real things together that they don't need to manufacture a mood. We did not talk about the cancer the way people usually talk about it, in careful, lowered voices, with that particular expression that means I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. We had moved past that. Junie poured coffee. Waverly stole a croissant from the cart and got flakes down her bridesmaid dress within the first 10 minutes and was entirely unbothered. Rosamund sat cross-legged on the bed with a cosmetics bag she had spent 3 weeks curating specifically for a bride in remission with sensitive skin, which was how she'd described me to the makeup artist she'd hired, with such matter-of-fact tenderness that I'd had to look at the ceiling for a moment when she told me. "There you are," Rosamund said when she held up the mirror and showed me what she'd done. And there I was. The wig was the last thing. I had chosen it carefully, weeks of research, 3 consultations, a specialist in Portland who worked specifically with cancer patients and understood the difference between something that would photograph well and something that would feel like mine for 8 hours straight. It was a warm medium brown, close to my natural color before treatment, styled in loose waves that Rosamund pinned back on one side with a pearl clip I'd bought in Napa Valley the summer before the diagnosis, on a trip with Colton when we still thought our problems were ordinary problems. I set it on my head. Adjusted the front edge. Pressed the sides. It felt secure. It always felt secure. I had worn it for 4 months, through client meetings at Harland and Voss, through site visits, through 2 family dinners where no one mentioned it and I did not volunteer anything. It had never moved. I had never felt it shift. I am telling you this because of what came later, and because I need you to understand, it was not a fragile thing. It was not something that could slip. What happened later was not an accident. My parents arrived at 8:30. I need to tell you about my father before I tell you about anything else. Because you cannot understand what happened at the reception without understanding the architecture of what my family had built around me first, and you cannot understand the architecture without understanding Garrett Duchamp. My father is 58 years old. He is not a loud man. He doesn't pound tables or raise his voice or make scenes in the way that you can point to and name. What he does is subtler and more durable. He makes silence uncomfortable. He asks questions in a tone that makes the questions sound like verdicts. He says, I only want what's best for you the way other people say you owe me. He has a way of occupying the center of a room that has nothing to do with volume. It's positional, almost architectural, the way he places himself at the point where all the sightlines converge and then waits to see who comes to him. He had not wanted me to marry Colton. Not because of anything specific about Colton. Colton Reeve was 34, a civil engineer, steady and patient and constitutionally incapable of cruelty. My father's objection wasn't specific. It was categorical. Colton was not the right kind of people, which was a phrase my father used and never defined because the indefinability was the mechanism. The right kind of people was a standard that could always be moved, a door that could always be closed. It required nothing of him and cost Colton everything. When I was diagnosed 14 months before the wedding, my father's first call was not to ask how I was. It was to ask whether Colton was going to be a problem. Whether he was prepared for this sort of thing. Whether I had considered the burden I was placing on a man I barely knew. Colton, whom I had been with for 3 years at that point, who had sat beside me in the parking lot of the oncology center for 40 minutes after the appointment, not talking, just present, while I processed the words that had just been said to me in a room with a very clean desk and a window that looked out at nothing in particular. I answered my father calmly. I told him Colton and I were fine. I thanked him for calling. I hung up and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed for a while. One of those breathings that is less about oxygen and more about reminding yourself that the body still knows how to do its basic functions even when the mind has gone somewhere unreachable. Then I went back upstairs because I had a follow-up question about the treatment schedule, and there was no version of my life where I let my father make me miss a medical appointment. That is the kind of woman I had become by the time I got to my wedding day. Not brittle. Not angry or not only angry. Precise. Intentional. 14 months of deciding, every day, what I was going to give my attention to and what I was going to leave on the table. He arrived at the venue at 10:15. The Dellwood Estate, a restored Victorian property outside Sacramento with a garden ceremony space and a ballroom that held 200, was not where my father had suggested we hold the wedding. He had suggested a club in Marin where his college friend was a member, which would have required inviting 40 people I'd never met and positioning the event as something it wasn't. I had said no. He had said, I'm only trying to help you do this right. I had said I appreciate that, and we've already put the deposit down on Dellwood. That was 8 months before the wedding. He had not brought it up again. That was how my father operated. He registered objections, waited to see if they took hold, and if they didn't, he filed them away. He didn't abandon positions. He archived them. I watched him cross the garden at 10:15 with my mother at his side and my brother Wade 3 steps behind, and something in my chest did what it always did in my father's vicinity. Not quite a flinch, not quite a tightening, something between the two. An old reflex. 31 years of calibration. He looked at me the way he always looked at me at important moments, like he was already composing his opinion of how it would go. I held Waverly's hand and watched him cross the grass. My mother, Carlene, knocked twice and came into the bridal suite without waiting, the way she had entered rooms my entire life. She was dressed in pale gold, which she had selected without consulting me, and which I had decided not to mention. My brother Wade was behind her, 28, 6'1", with my father's jaw and my mother's talent for entering a room as though he owned it. He had flown in from Denver 2 days before. He had not offered to help with anything. Look at you, my mother said. She set her purse on the armchair and looked at me with the expression she'd been giving me since the diagnosis, that particular look that was trying to be warmth but was actually a performance of warmth, a little too wide in the eyes, a little too soft at the corners of the mouth, the look of a woman who has decided how to feel about a situation and is demonstrating the feeling rather than having it. You look almost like yourself. Almost. I smoothed the front of my dress. A small, unconscious motion, fingers flat against the fabric. Thank you, I said. Wade leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The hair's good, he said. You can barely tell. I watched Rosamund, in the mirror's reflection, stop what she was doing with the cosmetics bag. Junie set down her coffee cup. Waverly, still holding her second croissant, went very still. Thank you, Wade, I said. My voice was steady. I kept my eyes on my own reflection, not his. He shrugged, a loose, performatively casual gesture. I'm just saying. It looks real. That's the point, right? Carlene made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite agreement, somewhere between the two and closer to both than to neither. I didn't fill the silence. Rosamund moved first. She picked up the cosmetics bag and carried it to the bathroom and closed the door behind her with a quiet, deliberate click. The sound of a woman who has something to say and has chosen not to say it, which is its own kind of eloquence. Junie refilled my coffee and pressed it into my hands and squeezed my fingers once. Waverly looked at Wade with an expression I filed away for later. I need to tell you about Harland and Voss before I tell you about the ceremony, because everything that happened that night was built on a foundation that most people in the room didn't know existed, and you need to understand the foundation. Harland and Voss Architecture, LLC, was founded in Sacramento in 1987 by my grandfather, Raimundo Voss, and a man named Gerald Harland who retired in 2009. My grandfather had built the firm the way he built everything. Quietly, without announcement, billing fair rates and doing the work correctly and returning calls promptly, which in the architecture business is, it turns out, a form of distinction. By the time I joined the firm 6 years ago, fresh from my graduate program at the University of Oregon, Harland and Voss had 8 full-time employees, a solid regional reputation for mixed-use residential work, and a client list that included 3 of the larger property developers in the Central Valley. My grandfather's name was on the letterhead. Gerald Harland's name was on the letterhead too, by inertia and my grandfather's particular loyalty to things that had served their purpose. My father's name was not on the letterhead, had never been on the letterhead, had never been on anything connected to the firm in any professional capacity. This had been a source of friction in my family for approximately 30 years. My father's position, stated and restated at various dinner tables across those 30 years, was that my grandfather was leaving money on the table. That the firm could be larger. That the right partnerships, the right developer relationships, the right positioning, all of which my father was always available to help facilitate, for a consideration that was never quite spelled out, would transform Harland and Voss from a solid regional firm into something more significant. My grandfather had listened to these suggestions with the patience of a man who has long since made his decision and feels no particular need to argue it. He had acted on none of them. What my father did not know, what I had not known for the first 2 years I worked at the firm, was why. I found out on a Tuesday evening in November, 3.5 years before the wedding. I had stayed late to finish specifications on a mixed-use project in Midtown. This is the kind of work that fills most of an architect's actual hours, not the drawings that end up in portfolios, but the granular, unglamorous work underneath them. Material schedules, code compliance cross-references, coordination with the structural engineer's drawings. It is the kind of work that requires concentration and patience and a willingness to care about things that other people consider beneath caring about. I had been at Harland and Voss for 2.5 years at that point, and I had learned to care about those things because my grandfather cared about them, and because the one time I had let my attention slip, a material schedule for a renovation project in Folsom, a transposition error in a window specification. The error had been caught by my grandfather in review and corrected without comment, without reproach, with only a single question. Do you understand where it went wrong? I had understood. I had not made the same error again. My grandfather's office door had been closed all day, which was unusual. He took meetings at the small table near his window and left the door open as a default. At 8:30, when the rest of the office had gone and I was the last one there, he opened the door. He stood in the frame for a moment, looking at me the way he sometimes did, like he was running a figure through a formula he'd been working on for a long time. "Camila," he said, Come here a minute. I followed him into his office. He went to the filing cabinet against the far wall, the old four-drawer lateral, the one that had been there since before I joined the firm and that no one touched because my grandfather managed it himself. He reached into the second drawer all the way to the back and took out a folder. Plain manila. No label. Thick. He set it on his desk but did not open it. He put both hands flat on the surface of it and looked at me. I'm going to tell you something, he said. And when I'm done, I don't want you to ask me questions tonight. I want you to go home and sleep on it and come back to me in the morning. I looked at the folder. Okay, I said. This firm, he said, has a value that is not on any document your father has ever seen. And your father has tried on 4 separate occasions to see those documents. The last time was in March of this year, when he contacted Gerald Harlan's son, who has no standing in this firm and never has, and asked him to request an accounting on Harlan's behalf. I was quiet. Gerald's son called me, my grandfather said. Immediately. Because Gerald Harlan was a man of integrity and he raised one. He lifted his hands from the folder but did not open it. I have spent 32 years, he said, making sure this firm could not be accessed, restructured, or claimed by anyone who did not build it. The structure is specific. I had good legal help. And I have been, for the last year, updating certain documents to reflect a change in the ownership succession plan. He looked at me. I looked back at him. Me. I said, You have billed over 4,000 hours in 2 years, he said. You have managed 3 projects that came in under budget and on schedule. You found the structural issue on the Morrison Street building before it went to permit. He paused. The Morrison Street building was a 4-story mixed-use project in Midtown, a client I had inherited from a senior architect who'd left the firm. During the permit coordination phase, I had caught a discrepancy between the structural engineer's drawings and the architectural drawings, a load-bearing wall that had been repositioned in a late design revision without the corresponding structural update. It was the kind of error that happens in fast-moving projects, the kind that gets caught in review or doesn't get caught at all, and when it doesn't get caught, it becomes someone else's catastrophic problem 18 months after construction is complete. I had flagged it. I had sat in 3 meetings to resolve it. I had redrawn 6 sheets. I had not mentioned it to anyone outside the firm. That finding, my grandfather said, saved the client $400,000. It also saved this firm a professional liability claim that would have damaged our insurance standing for a decade. Your father has never set foot in this building for professional purposes. He has called 11 times requesting information about the firm's valuation. I have notes of every call. I counted the pause instead of answering it. The folder, I finally said. He nodded. When the time is right. Not yet. But I want you to know it exists. He reached into the folder, just far enough to take out a single page, a cover sheet, and held it up so I could see the heading. Harland and Voss Architecture, LLC, Amended Operating Agreement and Succession Schedule. Date of amendment, October of that year. He held it for 10 seconds. He slid it back in. He put the folder in the second drawer of the lateral cabinet, all the way to the back. Go home, he said. Sleep. I went home. I did not sleep. I had thought about that folder during the months that followed, through the diagnosis, which came 8 months later in a room with a very clean desk, through the treatment cycles that rearranged my life into a different shape, one organized around appointment schedules and lab results and the particular bureaucratic grind of being seriously ill in America, through the phone calls from my father, all 11 of them, none of which were to ask how I was doing and all of which circled in one formulation or another the same question. What would happen to the firm if I were not there to work in it? I had thought about the folder during those calls and I had not mentioned it because my grandfather had told me not to and because I understood, in the way you understand things about people you have known your whole life, that he would tell me when the time was right. 6 weeks before my wedding, when Dr. Anand had used the word remission in a sentence with my name in it, I had driven from the oncology center to my grandfather's office without calling first. He had been at his desk. He had looked up when I came in and looked at my face and understood without my saying anything, and he had gotten up and gone to the filing cabinet in the far wall and taken out a folder. Not the same folder, a newer one, thicker, with a return address from Claire Ashworth's firm on L Street, and set it on the desk between us. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said. "I think this is it." We had gone to Claire Ashworth's office that afternoon. Claire was a partner specializing in business succession and closely held company law, and she walked us through the amended operating agreement in the methodical, unhurried way of someone who has done this kind of thing many times and knows that thoroughness at this stage costs far less than ambiguity later. The agreement established a single-member ownership structure with my name as the sole member of record, effective upon my grandfather's retirement or incapacitation, whichever occurred first. My grandfather had filed a notice of partial retirement with the California Secretary of State's office that same week. The effective date of the ownership transfer was October 3rd, 11 days before my wedding. I had put my copy of the agreement in the manila envelope on my nightstand and not told anyone except Colton, who had held my hand at the kitchen table while I explained it and then said, very quietly, "He's been building this for 32 years. And I had said yes. And we had sat with that for a moment, both of us understanding that some things that look like patience are actually love in its most long-form expression. The morning of my wedding, I had looked at that envelope in the Grey Dark hotel room and felt something I didn't have a word for yet. Something between gratitude and steadiness, the feeling of standing on ground that has been prepared for you, carefully and over a very long time, by someone who knew exactly what kind of ground you would need. The ceremony was beautiful. What came next was Wade. He stood up again. Not for a toast this time, not with a glass, and he walked around the end of the table with the stride of a man who has decided something and is no longer interested in the question of whether he should. He came up behind my chair. And before anyone in the room had fully processed that he was moving with a purpose, his hand closed around the back of my wig. I felt the pressure first. Fingers curling against the base of my skull, finding the edge of the wig cap at my nape. Then the pull. It came off in a single motion. Fast. The pearl clip went with it, yanked from where Rosamund had pinned it that morning, and I felt the cool air of the ballroom on my scalp. And I heard my mother's voice before anyone else's, before the room reacted, before Colton moved. "There," she said. And then, louder, with the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for exactly this audience. "There. Now he can see her. The groom deserves to know what he's really married. Not a bald ghost, a real woman. Let him see what she really is." The room made a sound. I was still sitting in my chair. My hands were flat on the table. The tablecloth was white linen and I could feel the weave of it under my palms. I did not reach up to cover my head. I did not look down. I kept my eyes level and my voice, when it came, was very quiet. Quiet enough that only the people nearest could hear it, and I said nothing. Not yet. Not one word. Because across the room, through the gap in the crowd that had formed around the nearest table, the way crowds form in ballrooms when something has happened that no one knows how to categorize yet, I saw the door to the ballroom open. And I saw my grandfather walk in. Raimundo Vos. 73 years old, wearing his good charcoal jacket, his white hair combed back. He had driven 2 hours from Stockton without telling me he was coming. He never attended family events when my father was going to be present, had not done so in 6 years, since a Thanksgiving dinner in Modesto that I do not discuss and that he has never brought up again. He was carrying in his left hand a manila envelope. The kind that is thick. The kind that has been held onto for a long time. My grandfather did not hurry. That was the first thing. The thing that told me this was not a coincidence, not an old man who had happened to arrive late with some paperwork. Raimundo Vos moved through the gap in the crowd at the pace of a man who had planned exactly where he was going to stand and was in no particular rush to get there, because the outcome was already settled in his mind and had been for some time. He stopped at the edge of the dance floor. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at Wade. He looked at me, across the room, with an expression I can only describe as I am here, and then he looked at my father with an expression I had never seen him aim at another human being in 31 years of knowing him. I was still sitting in my chair. The ballroom had the quality of a room where everyone has simultaneously decided not to move first. 200 people, and the only sounds were the settling of the building and someone near the back setting a glass down very carefully on a table. My father stood up. Not quickly. Garrett Duchamp did not do anything quickly when he thought people were watching. He stood with his full height, his chair pushed back with one hand in a gesture that was almost elegant, and he looked at Raimundo with the expression he had always reserved for my grandfather, the one he never bothered to disguise around me. A kind of contempt that said you are peripheral to what matters here. Raimundo, my father said. Level, conversational. The voice he used when he wanted a room to understand that he was the adult in the space. This isn't a good time. My grandfather set the envelope on the nearest empty table. He pressed 2 fingers flat on top of it and looked at my father and said nothing. My father's jaw shifted. I said, "I heard you, Garrett." My grandfather's voice was the same voice it had always been, low, unhurried, carrying the particular texture of a man who has worked with his hands for 40 years and no longer needs to raise his voice to be understood. He was not looking at the envelope. He was looking at my father. And my father, for one fraction of a second, looked at the envelope. That fraction of a second was everything. I walked across the ballroom floor toward my grandfather's table. Toward my father, who had turned from the envelope to watch me cross the room. Toward my mother, whose voice had finally gone quiet, who was watching me approach with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not fear, exactly, but the thing adjacent to it, the awareness that something has been set in motion that she cannot recall. My grandfather looked up at me when I reached the table. He slid the envelope across the white linen toward me. I looked at it. Then I looked at my father. My father's face had gone to a particular stillness. "Open it," my grandfather said. I reached for it. And my father's hand came down on my wrist. Not hard, not violent, but firm, the specific pressure of a person who has decided they have the right, and he said, very quietly, very close to my face, "Don't." My father's hand was dry and cool against my wrist. I looked down at it. Then I looked up at his face. There is a thing that happens in the body when someone touches you without permission, not with force, just with the specific pressure of someone who has decided they have the right to. A kind of internal reckoning, fast and quiet, that runs the options and arrives at a conclusion before the conscious mind has finished forming the question. I felt it happen. My body made its decision before I did. I set the envelope back on the table with my free hand. Then I looked at my father's fingers on my wrist and waited. He released me. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who needs the release to read as a choice rather than a retreat. He straightened. He adjusted his jacket. "This is not the place," he said. "You just put your hand on me at my wedding," I said. "In front of 200 people. I was preventing you from making a mistake. By grabbing my wrist. Camila." His voice dropped to the register he used when he wanted to signal that a conversation had moved from public to private. A sonic curtain, a tone that said this is between us now. This is not the moment. Let your grandfather keep his papers. We'll sit down tomorrow and discuss whatever he thinks he's doing, and we'll sort it out like adults. Like adults, I said. Yes. Wade ripped my wig off at my wedding. My father looked at me. The sonic curtain held. And I told you I would speak to him about that. You nodded at him, Dad. A pause. I don't know what you think you saw. I was looking directly at you. You were upset. You misread. I have been reading your face, I said, since I was 4 years old. I did not misread anything. He inhaled through his nose. A controlled sound. The sound of a man managing a situation that is not going the way situations are supposed to go when he is managing them. Around us, the ballroom continued. The band had moved into something slow. Couples were on the dance floor. The 2 tables nearest to us had the posture of people who were watching without appearing to watch. Shoulders angled away, faces forward, attention entirely in our direction. My grandfather had not moved. Douglas Reeve had not moved. The envelope sat on the white linen between us like a third party at the table who had something to say and was waiting for the right moment. My father looked at it again. "What is that?" He said directly, to my grandfather this time, not to me. My grandfather looked up at him. You know what it is, Garrett. I know what you've told Camila it is, my father said. Which is a different thing. Is it? Raymundo. My father pulled out the chair across from my grandfather and sat down without being invited, occupied the space as a statement, which was also something he did. We have known each other for 30 years. I would like you to extend me the courtesy of a direct conversation. I've always been direct with you, my grandfather said. You've never liked it. I'm asking you as family. You're not my family, my grandfather said. Quietly. Without heat. The way you state a fact that has been true for a long time and requires no particular emphasis. You married into my family. That is a different thing. My father's face did something subtle. A compression around the eyes, a tightening at the jaw that he caught and controlled before it became fully visible. Almost controlled. The firm, my father said. Let's talk about the firm. All right, my grandfather said. I have been patient, my father said, for a very long time. I have waited. I have respected whatever pace you wanted to set. But Camila has been ill, and the question of the firm's future. Camila is in remission, my grandfather said. My father paused. For now. The two words sat in the air between us. I watched my grandfather look at my father with an expression I had never seen on his face in 31 years. Not anger, not contempt, but something that was the final dissolution of a patience that had been very long and very deliberate and had simply now run its course. The expression of a man who has waited to see if a thing will change and has received his answer. For now, my grandfather repeated. That's what you said. It's a legitimate. It is not a legitimate anything, Garrett. It is a thing a man says when he is hoping his daughter stays sick long enough for him to get his hands on what she's built. My father stood up. Fast, the first fast thing he had done all night. His chair scraped the floor. That is not. Sit down, my grandfather said. I will not. Sit down, Garrett. You are making a scene at your daughter's wedding. Which is already more scene than this night needed. My father stood for 3 seconds. The nearest table had stopped pretending. For people sitting completely still, glasses halfway to mouths, watching. He sat down. I had not moved. I was standing at the corner of the table, my clutch in my hand, watching my father the way I had watched him my whole life, with the specific, trained attention of a person who has learned that what a man says is less informative than what his body does in the half-second before he says it. The firm, my father said again, his voice reset, smoothed, controlled, the sonic curtain back in place, has a real valuation. I've had it assessed, informally yes, but by people who know the Central Valley market. The Midtown Mixed-Use Project alone adds. You've had it assessed, my grandfather said. Informally. Without my knowledge. I was trying to understand the situation. The situation, my grandfather said, is that Harland & Voss is my firm. I built it. My name is on it. And you have no standing in it, legal, professional, or familial, that I have not explicitly granted. Camila is your heir. Yes. And Camila is my daughter. I am saying that plainly, without irony, because it was, and because what came later does not get to retroactively claim what came before. The October light came through the oak trees at an angle that made the whole garden look like something out of a photograph. Colton cried when he saw me. Not dramatically, just his eyes going bright and his jaw working once, and then he smiled so wide it looked like it might have hurt, and I thought, that right there. That is the entire reason. His mother, Diane, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth in the front row. His father, Douglas, nodded at me once. A slow, serious nod that felt like something being given rather than withheld. My father walked me down the aisle. He held my arm correctly. He said nothing inappropriate during the 8 minutes we stood in the vestibule waiting for the music to begin. He delivered me to Colton and shook Colton's hand and stepped to his seat. I almost let myself believe, in those 8 minutes and in the 35 minutes of the ceremony that followed, that the day was going to be exactly what it was supposed to be. The reception was where it changed. The Dellwood Ballroom held 200 people. round tables with white linens, string lights strung along the ceiling beams, a four-piece band set up near the dance floor that played standards and Stevie Wonder with the relaxed competence of musicians who have done this 1,000 times and still mean it. Colton and I had spent 3 months on the details, not because I needed the wedding to be elaborate, but because after 14 months of hospital waiting rooms and insurance calls and treatment schedules and the particular exhaustion of being seriously ill in a system that makes being seriously ill into a second full-time job, I had wanted, for one day, to be somewhere that was just beautiful. Just mine. The toasts began at 7. Colton's best man, Darius, who had known Colton since their second year at Oregon State and who had the particular gift of being funny without making anyone feel like a prop, gave a toast that made the room laugh and then went quiet in the good way, the way that means something landed cleanly. Waverly gave one that was warm and specific and ended with her looking directly at me and saying, "I am so glad my brother found someone who makes him want to be better. And I am so glad you're here." I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Then my brother Wade stood up. I had not known he was planning to speak. There was no discussion of it, no coordination with me or Colton. He was not on the program. He picked up a glass of champagne and pushed back his chair and stood up without looking at me, without looking at Colton, without any of the signals a person gives when they are about to say something they want to land well. He tapped the glass. The room went quiet. "So," he said, and his voice had that particular Wade quality. Casual, almost bored, the tone of a man who has decided that what he's about to say is obviously true and requires no softening. "I want to say something real. Okay? Because that's what little sisters need from their big brothers, someone who's going to say the actual thing." Colton's hand found mine under the table. His thumb pressed once against my knuckle. "Camila's been through a lot," Wade said. "We all know that. The cancer thing, yeah." He let the word sit. "And look, she got through it. She looks great." He gestured toward me with his champagne glass, a loose, magnanimous sweep, the gesture of a man performing generosity. "The wig it looks great. Very convincing." I heard Junie, 2 seats down, draw a breath. "But I think what Colton needs to know, going into this, what the family needs to say out loud because nobody's saying it." "Wade." My father's voice, from the table to the left. Not a warning. Something flatter than a warning. Something that was almost permission dressed as restraint. Wade looked at my father. Something passed between them. A half-second of eye contact I had seen before, in other rooms at other family tables my whole life. A kind of agreement. A green light wearing the clothes of a pause. "Is that Camila's always been the difficult one," Wade continued. "The one who does things her own way. Doesn't make it easy. And Colton, man, you're a good guy and I just want to make sure you know what you're getting into. Long term. Because she's not going to get easier." 200 people. The band had stopped. Someone at the far end of the room coughed. Colton's hand tightened on mine. I could feel the change in his grip, the way patience becomes something harder and more structural. I kept my face still. My voice, when I thought about using it, was somewhere very far down in my chest, and I kept it there deliberately. I was aware of my dress against the back of my chair. The weight of the pearl clip in my hair. The way the string lights above us were perfectly, uselessly beautiful. Wade set down his glass and sat back down. My mother, and I am telling you this because it happened, because 200 people saw it, because it is part of the record, laughed. A small sound, the kind that is too quiet to be called a laugh and too deliberate to be called anything else. She touched the pearls at her throat and laughed into her hand like Wade had said something that was almost too true to be funny, but they had all known it was coming. My father looked at his plate. And then, and this is the part that I had not prepared for, that no part of my careful, intentional 14 months of precision preparation had accounted for, my father looked up from his plate. He looked at me. Then he looked at Wade. And he nodded. One nod. Small. Almost imperceptible. But I was looking directly at him, and I had been reading my father's face since I was 4 years old, and I knew exactly what that nod meant. Good, it said. That needed to be said. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate. A small, quiet motion. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I did not look at the 200 people in that room whose silence had taken on the quality of an audience waiting to see what came next. What came next was not what I expected. I saw it. Colton saw it. I felt his hand shift against mine. Waverly, 3 seats to my left, had gone completely still, her eyes moving between the envelope and my father's face with the focused attention of someone assembling a picture from its parts. My father looked away from the envelope and back at my grandfather, and whatever had flickered across his face was gone, replaced by the controlled surface he wore in public. "We'll deal with whatever that is later," he said very quietly. "Tonight is not the time." "Understood," my grandfather said and let it land like a period, not a comma. He picked up the envelope, walked to an empty seat at the table nearest the door and sat down. He folded his hands on top of the envelope and waited. My father watched him for 3 seconds. Then he sat down. The band, after a moment of collective paralysis, began to play again. A Stevie Wonder song, the wrong tempo for the room, but the sound of it broke the freeze and people began to move again, slowly, the way people move after something has happened that they haven't yet decided how to discuss. Colton leaned close to my ear. "President." Just that. My name low and certain in his voice. "I know," I said. I was still not covering my head. "I want to be precise about that." My hands were on the table, and the cool air of the ballroom was on my scalp, and I was aware of every person in my sightline who was trying not to look at me and failing. I was aware of my mother, 4 seats to my left, who had not spoken again since her voice had cut through the room. The groom deserves a real woman, and who was now examining her dessert fork with the focused attention of a woman who has realized, slightly too late, that she may have miscalculated. I reached up. Slowly. I picked up the wig from where Wade had dropped it on the table. It had landed beside a floral centerpiece, which was the detail I knew would stay with me, the absurd juxtaposition of that, and I set it on my head with both hands, adjusting the front edge, pressing the sides. I did not look around the room while I did it. I looked at Colton. He looked back at me. His eyes were dry now. Something had replaced the emotion in them, something quieter and harder and more permanent. I smoothed the tablecloth in front of me with one hand. "Okay," I said. What I did not tell Colton, not then, not until later, was that I had seen that envelope before. Not that exact envelope. But I had seen what it contained. I knew the shape of what was inside it. And I understood, watching my grandfather sit at the table nearest the door with his hands folded and his charcoal jacket and all the patience in the world, that what my father thought was a social confrontation at a wedding reception was not that at all. It was the end of a 32-year conversation. My father came to our table at 8:45. Not Wade. Not my mother. My father himself, which told me something about what he had read in my grandfather's arrival that he was not ready to let anyone else see yet. He sat down in the empty seat beside me, Waverly's chair, before she'd moved to give Colton's mother room, and he folded his hands on the table in the way he always folded his hands when he was preparing to be reasonable. "Camila," he said, "I want to apologize for Wade." I looked at him. "He was out of line," my father said. "He'd had too much to drink and he was trying to be, I don't know what he was trying to be. He's not good at this kind of thing." I was quiet. "Your mother didn't mean," he stopped. "She was caught off guard. She was laughing, Dad." My voice was even. Not cold, even. The distinction mattered to me. My father's jaw moved once. People react strangely under pressure. What was the pressure? I said. He looked at me. For a moment something crossed his face that was almost discomfort. Not guilt, my father did not do guilt, but the nearest neighbor to it, the awareness that a thing has not gone the way it was supposed to go. "I just want tonight to be good for you," he said. "I know," I said. I kept my hands on the table, both of them visible and relaxed. "And Raimundo," he started. "Is my grandfather," I said. "And he's welcome at my wedding." My father looked across the room toward where Raimundo was still sitting, the envelope still on the table in front of him, talking quietly with Colton's father Douglas, who had walked over at some point in the last 20 minutes and sat down beside him. The two men were leaning toward each other with the posture of people engaged in a conversation that has real content. My father watched them for a long moment. "What is that?" he said. Not quite to me. It was the voice of a man speaking to himself, running a private calculation. "I don't know," I said. It was the first untrue thing I had said all night. It was a specific kind of not true, the kind where you know the shape of a thing without being willing to name it for someone who hasn't earned the right to know. My father stood up, straightened his jacket. He looked at me with the expression he used when he had decided to de-escalate visibly, which was not the same thing as actually de-escalating. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said. "Sure," I said. He walked toward the table near the door. I watched him cross the room. Watched him get close enough that Raymundo looked up. Watched Douglas Reeve lean back in his chair with the unhurried ease of a man who is not going anywhere and knows it. My father said something I couldn't hear from across the room. My grandfather looked at the envelope. Then at my father. Then said something back. My father reached for the envelope. My grandfather put his hand flat on top of it. And across the ballroom, from a direction I wasn't looking, my mother's voice came clearly over the noise of the band in the room. Loud enough that 2 nearby tables heard it, loud enough that Colton stiffened beside me, loud enough that Junie's hand found my arm under the tablecloth. "She manipulated that old man into this," my mother said. "This is what she does. She has always done this. She runs to Raymundo because she knows Garrett won't." I turned. My mother was standing. She had pushed back from her chair and was on her feet with both hands pressed on the table, and her face had gone past the performance of warmth, past any performance at all, into something that was simply, plainly, her actual opinion, freed from its container. "She has run that man," my mother said louder now, "since she was 17 years old. Every decision he has made about that firm, she has put her thumb on it. And now she's using her." She stopped. "Then, she's using the sympathy. The cancer. To make sure." "Carlene." My father's voice, sharp from across the room. But my mother had turned to the nearest table. 2 couples, strangers, guests of Colton's from his firm, and she was saying it to them, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who has been holding a position for a long time and has finally found enough adrenaline to state it in public. That firm should have come to Garrett. It was always supposed to come to Garrett. Raymundo promised. I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatically. I stood up the way you stand up when you have decided something, and I picked up my clutch from the table, and I said to Colton quietly, "I need a minute." He started to rise. "Stay," I said. "Please. I'll be right back." He stopped. "Help," I said. "Was that the word you were looking for?" "Yes." "You called me the day after my diagnosis," I said, and asked whether Colton was going to be a burden. I was worried. "You asked if he was prepared for this sort of thing. You asked if I had considered what I was putting on him." I paused. "You did not ask me how I was." My father was quiet. "You called 11 times," I said, "in 14 months. My grandfather's notes say 11. None of those calls asked how I was. Every one of them asked about the firm." My father's head came up. "Fast. You've seen his notes." "He told me about them," I said. "Not the same thing. Raymundo has been," his voice shifted harder, the control fraying at the edges. "He has been building a case against me. In my own family. 4 years. And you have let him." "He has been running a business," I said. "That I work in. That you have tried to access 4 times without his knowledge. I have a right." "You don't," I said. "That's the thing, Dad. You genuinely don't. You have no standing in that firm. You never have. And whatever you think, Camila, inheriting it means for you." "It means," my father said, and now the control was gone, not into shouting but into a cold flatness that was, in its way, worse, a voice stripped of its social register, just the thing itself. "It means that my daughter's assets are my family's assets. It means that 30 years of Raymundo cutting me out of every conversation about that firm's future comes to an end. It means that what he built, what you helped build, does not disappear into." He gestured at the ballroom at Colton's direction, a gesture that was supposed to encompass the wedding and ended up encompassing me. Into a marriage I was never consulted about, and a future I was never asked to be part of. You weren't consulted, I said, because every time I have built something, you have looked for a way to be named on it. He stared at me. The apartment in Portland, I said. You wanted to co-sign and I said no, and you called it ingratitude for 2 years. Graduate school, you told me to go to Berkeley so you could tell people your daughter went to Berkeley. The job at Harland & Voss, you told me I was only offered it because of the family connection, and I should negotiate a higher title to reflect my actual standing, and what you meant was your standing. I was trying to advocate for you. You were trying to attach yourself to me, I said. Every single time. And when I wouldn't let you, the story became that I was difficult. That I was the hard one. That I didn't appreciate what I had. My father looked at me across the white linen, across the envelope, across 31 years of dinner tables and phone calls and carefully managed registers of voice. You have always been ungrateful, he said. Flat. Final. The voice of a man who has decided the performance is over and this is what is underneath. Everything I have done, every door I tried to open for you, every time I tried to position this family to give you something real, you have treated it as an imposition. You have taken Raimundo's version of events and made it your gospel and shut me out of your life and then wondered why this family doesn't function. I don't wonder, I said. You are exactly like him, my father said. Stubborn. Self-righteous. Convinced that doing everything alone makes you better than the people who love you. And I will tell you what I have always known about that. He leaned forward. You cannot cut your family out and then expect them to celebrate you. That is not how it works. That is not how any of this works. I am your father, and this firm, and this marriage, and whatever Raimundo thinks he's handing you in that envelope. None of it exists without the family you came from. None of it. He sat back. You cannot cut your family out and then expect them to celebrate you. He said it again. Quieter. The way a man says a thing when he believes it is the last true thing in the room. That is what this is, Camila. That is all this has ever been. Across the table, my grandfather had been still and silent through all of it. He looked at me now, not urgently, not with instruction, just the look he had given me in his office 3.5 years ago when he'd said I want you to go home and sleep on it and come back to me in the morning. The look of a man who is prepared for exactly this and is waiting to see if the person he prepared it for is ready. I looked back at my father. He was watching me with the expression of a man who has delivered a verdict and is waiting for it to settle, for the weight of it to do its work, waiting for me to feel the pull of it the way I had felt it at 4 and at 14 and at 22, that gravitational claim of you owe this family, which had always been, in every room and every register, the final argument. And then, from the direction of the main ballroom entrance, the door opened again. Not my grandfather this time. 2 people. A woman in a dark blazer carrying a leather portfolio, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done difficult things in difficult rooms before and has stopped finding the difficulty remarkable. And beside her, a man I recognized. Not from my family, not from Colton's, from a meeting 14 months ago, in a conference room on K Street in Sacramento, where I had sat across a long table and answered questions for 2 hours about Harland & Voss's operational history, its billing practices, its client relationships, and the 11 calls my grandfather had documented from my father requesting access to the firm's financial records. He looked at me across the ballroom. He nodded once. Also yes, my grandfather said. And your point. My father leaned forward, and here the sonic curtain dropped, not completely, not loudly, but enough that I could hear the thing beneath his controlled voice, the thing that had always been there, the actual engine running every conversation I had ever had with Garrett Duchamp about anything that mattered. My point, he said, is that what flows to Camila flows to this family. That is how inheritance works. That is how it has always worked. You built something real, Raimundo. No one is denying that, but the idea that you can route it around your own family, around me, around the people who have been here. You have not been here, my grandfather said. I am her father. I know who you are. Then you know, my father said, that I have a right to be part of this conversation. I have a right to understand what you're planning to do with a firm that my daughter has put years into, that she nearly died. Don't, my grandfather said. His voice for the first time had an edge. Don't use that. I'm not using anything. I'm stating a fact. You said 10 minutes ago at that table that her remission was temporary. For now. And now you want to invoke her illness as your standing? Pick one, Garrett. You don't get both. My father looked at me. And I understood in that moment the specific nature of what I was watching. Not a man caught in a contradiction, but a man recalibrating, running a fast assessment of which angle had better yield, which pressure point was softer. I had watched him do it in small ways my whole life. This was simply the first time I had seen him do it at scale, in a ballroom at my wedding, with an envelope on the table between us. Camila, he said. His voice shifted, softer, the register he used when he wanted to invoke our relationship, the father-daughter weight of it. Help me understand what's happening here. Whatever Raimundo has told you, whatever he's prepared, I'm asking you, as your father, to let us have a conversation before anything is signed or recorded or made official. I looked at him. What did you say to Wade before the toasts? I said. A pause. What? This afternoon. Before the reception. I watched the two of you in the garden for about 4 minutes. What did you say to him? We talked. We were catching up. He hadn't planned to give a toast, I said. It wasn't on the program. He hadn't mentioned it to me or to Colton. And the things he said, I stopped. Let one beat pass. The things he said were specific. They were things you believe. I've heard you say versions of them. Camila. Did you tell him to do it? My father looked at me for a long moment. I suggested, he said carefully, that there were things that needed to be said. The table was very quiet. And the wig, I said. That was not, he stopped. That was Wade. That was his own. Did you know he was going to do it? A pause. Shorter this time. The kind of pause that is its own answer. I knew he was frustrated, my father said, he felt it was dishonest. That Colton deserved. Stop, I said. He stopped. You knew, I said. You knew, and you sat there, and you nodded. I nodded because Wade was saying something true. Something true. My voice was level, even, very quiet, and it was taking everything I had to keep it there. My wig. At my wedding. 6 weeks out of chemotherapy. And the true thing you needed said was that Colton deserved a real woman. That's not what he. That is exactly what he said. And Mom said it louder. My father looked at the table. A rare thing, my father looking away. He smoothed the tablecloth in front of him with one hand, a gesture so close to one of my own that I had to register it consciously and set it aside. Your mother, he said, was upset. She has been worried about you. About what you're building, this marriage, the firm, the direction you're taking. She expresses it badly. She said I was using my cancer as manipulation. She said it badly. She said it out loud. At my wedding. In front of 200 people who heard it. Camila. His voice shifted again, and now I could hear the thing I had always heard beneath my father's voice in all its registers, the thing that was constant across every version of him I had ever known. You are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. But you have spent the last 6 years building a life that cuts your family out. You moved to Sacramento for Raimundo's firm. You met Colton through connections I had nothing to do with. You went through your illness without asking me for anything, without letting me. Without letting you what? I said. My father had not seen them yet. He was still looking at me, still waiting for the verdict he had delivered to settle into something he could use. Waiting for the weight of you cannot cut your family out, and then expect them to celebrate you to do what it had always done in rooms where I was standing, which was to pull me back toward the center of gravity he had spent 31 years positioning himself as. Camila, he said. Say something. I said, all right. He waited. The word had not given him what he expected. It was too small, too settled, the wrong shape for the moment he had built. He had built toward capitulation or confrontation, toward tears or argument, toward any of the responses that would have let him stay at the center of what was happening. All right gave him nothing to push against. I turned to my grandfather. "Is she here?" I said. "She is," he said. I turned back toward the ballroom entrance, where the woman in the dark blazer and the man from the K Street meeting were waiting with the particular patience of people who have been told exactly when to arrive and have arrived exactly then. The woman's name was Claire Ashworth. She was a partner at a Sacramento firm that specialized in business succession and closely held company law. I had met her 4 months after the K Street deposition, in her office on a Tuesday afternoon, on a day I had told my supervisor I had a medical follow-up appointment, which was not entirely untrue, because my grandfather had made me see Dr. Anand that morning before we drove together to L Street. Claire had spent 2 hours walking us through the amended operating agreement with the methodical, unhurried thoroughness of someone who understands that ambiguity at this stage always costs more than the time spent removing it. She had asked me questions I had not anticipated, about my role at the firm, about the nature of the work I had done, about the Morrison Street finding and the Nakamura Group referral and the Hendricks development relationship and the Salinas County civic submission. She had taken notes in a precise, small hand and had said, at the end, "The record of your contribution to this firm is exceptionally well documented. Your grandfather has been keeping notes for a long time." I had known then that it was not going to be a simple contest. My father did not know her name. But he looked at her the way he had looked at the envelope, with the fast, involuntary attention of a man whose body has recognized a threat before his mind has finished identifying it. The body always knows first. My father's body knew. "Who is that?" he said. "That's Claire Ashworth," I said. "She's an attorney. She's been working with my grandfather for about 14 months. My father looked at my grandfather. My grandfather looked back at him with the expression of a man who has nothing left to manage and no further interest in managing it. "Raimundo," my father said. His voice had gone careful again. Not the cold flatness of the confrontation, but the controlled version, the voice of a man reassessing the room while buying himself time to do it. "Whatever you think you're doing here, tonight is not." "I know what night it is," my grandfather said. "I chose it. You chose my daughter's wedding. I chose the night your son pulled a wig off a woman 6 weeks out of chemotherapy," my grandfather said, "in front of 200 people, and the night you nodded at him for doing it. And the night Carlene stood up in a ballroom and told those same 200 people that my granddaughter was using her illness as manipulation." He paused. "I have been waiting for the right moment for 3 years, Garrett. You gave it to me tonight." My father stood up. Claire Ashworth had crossed the room by then, moving through the gap in the crowd that had reorganized itself around the table, the particular reorganization that happens when people have stopped pretending not to watch. The man from K Street. His name was Philip Garrett, no relation, a business valuator my grandfather had engaged separately from Claire, stayed near the entrance, near the door, in the position of a man who has delivered what he came to deliver and is content to wait for the evening to run its course. Claire set her leather portfolio on the table beside my grandfather and opened it with the same unhurried precision she had brought to every meeting I had ever had with her. "Mr. Duchamp," she said. "I'm Claire Ashworth. I represent Raimundo Voss in matters related to Harland and Voss Architecture, LLC. I think you should sit down." "I don't think I will," my father said. "That's fine," she said. She was already reaching into the portfolio. The first document came out in a single motion, a bound set of pages, perhaps 30 sheets, held together with a black binder clip. She took it out and set it on the table and unfolded the cover page slowly, pressing it flat with 2 fingers, and turned it to face my father. "This is the amended operating agreement for Harland and Voss Architecture, LLC, she said. "Executed 14 months ago, witnessed and notarized. It establishes a single-member ownership structure with Camila Torres as the sole member of record, effective upon Mr. Voss's retirement or incapacitation, whichever occurs first. Mr. Voss filed a notice of partial retirement with the California Secretary of State's office 6 weeks ago." My father looked at the cover page. He did not reach for it. 6 weeks ago, he said. Yes. While she was. While I was in remission, I said. Yes. He looked at me. Then back at the document. That's not, he stopped. That filing would have required, there's a process. There are notifications. All properly executed, Claire said. The filing is on record. I have the confirmation here as well. She reached into the portfolio again and took out a second document. A single sheet, the Secretary of State confirmation with its stamped date, and laid it flat beside the first. The effective date of the ownership transfer is October 3rd of this year. My father looked at the date. October 3rd was 11 days ago. He looked at the first document again, at the cover page, at my name in the member of record line. His face was doing something I had never seen it do. Not losing control, my father did not lose control, but running out of surface. The managed expressions, the sonic curtains, the controlled registers, they were still there, but there was nothing generating the performance anymore, just the mechanism running on its own momentum while the man inside it recalculated. The valuation, he said. He was speaking slowly, the way people speak when they are thinking harder than they are talking. The informal assessment I had done, the firm's assets, the client list. Yes, Claire said. That assessment put the firm's value at approximately. The assessment was based on publicly available information, Claire said, and some figures provided to your consultant by Gerald Harlan's son, who, as you may know, has had no access to the firm's financial records since Gerald Harlan's retirement in 2009. The figures he provided were not accurate. My father looked at her. The firm's actual valuation, she said, as conducted by the independent valuator Mr. Voss engaged. She nodded toward Philip Garrett, still near the entrance, his hands folded, waiting with the patience of a professional who has been paid to be present and will be present for as long as the situation requires. Puts the current market value of Harland and Voss architecture at $4.3 million, with a project pipeline carrying approximately $1.1 million in contracted future revenue. The number sat on the table between us like the envelope had sat, like a third party, patient and factual and entirely indifferent to my father's reaction to it. 4.3 million. Against whatever number Gerald Harlan's son had provided to my father's consultant. And I knew, because my grandfather had told me, that the number had come from a partial balance sheet from 2019 that had not accounted for the Midtown project or the 3 new client relationships I had developed in the 2 years since, or the Morrison Street liability avoided, or the Nakamura Group contract that had come entirely through a referral I had built at a conference in Portland on my own time. Without telling anyone at the firm, I was there specifically for that purpose. That can't be right, my father said. I have the full report, Claire said. She reached into the portfolio a third time. The third document was larger, a spiral-bound report, the Harland and Voss letterhead on the cover with the valuator's firm name below it. She reached in and took it out and unfolded it slowly across the table, laying it flat so the cover faced my father and the summary page faced my grandfather and me. You're welcome to review it, Claire said. It's accurate. My father reached for it. He picked it up. He turned to the summary page. I watched his eyes move across the numbers. The asset schedules, the client list with contracted values, the pipeline breakdown, the comparative market analysis placing Harland and Voss against 3 comparable Sacramento area architecture firms of similar size and tenure. I watched him turn to the project history page and saw him stop at the Morrison Street line item, structural deficiency identification, pre-permit phase, estimated client savings, $387,000, professional liability exposure avoided, see footnote 4, and I watched his jaw. He turned to footnote 4. He read it. He set the report down. He looked at my grandfather. You have been doing this, he said, for how long? Building the firm? My grandfather said. 32 years. Building this. He gestured at the documents on the table. The operating agreement, the Secretary of State confirmation, the valuation report, 3 objects laid out in a line on the white linen of a wedding reception table. Setting this up. Making sure I couldn't. Making sure the firm went to the person who built it with me, my grandfather said. Yes. I am her father. You are, my grandfather said. And Camila is 31 years old and has billed over 6,000 hours in this firm and developed 3 of our top 5 client relationships and has never once asked me for anything she hadn't already earned. He paused. You have called my office 11 times in 4 years asking for financial information you had no right to. The last time you had Gerald Harlan's son make the call for you because you thought I wouldn't recognize the approach. Another pause. I recognized the approach. My father looked at me. And I understood, looking back at him, that this was the moment. Not the moment the documents had been laid out. Not the moment Claire had stated the valuation. This moment, my father looking at me across 3 legal documents in 31 years, was the one my grandfather had been building toward and preparing me for 3.5 years. He had said, the night in his office with the folder on the desk between us, I want you to go home and sleep on it and come back to me in the morning. He had not meant sleep on the documents. He had meant sleep on what it would feel like to be standing here. I had slept on it for 3.5 years. I knew what it felt like. You cannot cut your family out, my father said. He said it quietly. Not the verdict delivery weight he had put on it before, not the flatness of the confrontation. Something closer to a man repeating a thing because it is the only thing he has left, the last sentence in a language he has been speaking his whole life and is only now beginning to hear from the outside. And then expect them to celebrate you. He said it to me. Directly. The second time those words had moved through the air between us tonight. I looked at him. I had been thinking for the last hour about what to say when this moment came, if it came, and it had come, in the way that things you have prepared for always arrive slightly differently than you imagined them but arrive nonetheless. I had thought about the Portland apartment, about Berkeley, about the job offer and the title negotiation and the 11 phone calls. I had thought about the way my father had looked at my grandfather with contempt for 30 years and called it family feeling. I had thought about the word remission and for now and what it means when the man who is supposed to celebrate your survival is, in the same breath, calculating what he can extract from it. I had thought about what my grandfather had said in his office 3.5 years ago, when I had asked why he hadn't simply told my father directly, at some dinner table or over some phone call, that the firm was already spoken for. Because, he had said, a man who believes he has a claim will dispute the claim. A man who has never had a claim has nothing to dispute. He had looked at his hands. I wanted there to be nothing left to dispute. There was nothing left to dispute. You said tonight, I said, that I have always been ungrateful. My father was quiet. You said it at the table. After Wade sat back down and Mom laughed and you nodded at him. You said, and I want to be precise about this because you said it directly, that I have always been ungrateful. That I have treated everything you did as an imposition. That I took Raymundo's version of events and made it my gospel. My father looked at me with the expression of a man who is not certain where this is going but is fairly certain he does not want to arrive there. Before that, I said, you said I was exactly like him. Stubborn. Self-righteous. Convinced that doing everything alone makes me better than the people who love me. I kept my voice even. I kept my hands still at my sides. And before that, I said, the thing you said the loudest, the thing you said twice because you believed it was the last true thing in the room, was that I cannot cut my family out and then expect them to celebrate me. A pause. I want to tell you what I was actually doing, I said, while you were saying those things. He waited. When you called me the day after my diagnosis and asked whether Colton was going to be a burden, I was sitting in a parking structure outside the oncology center, and I was trying to remember how to breathe. And I answered your question. I told you we were fine. I thanked you for calling. And then I went back upstairs because I had a follow-up question about the treatment schedule, and there was no version of my life where I let that call be the reason I missed it. My father said nothing. When you called the second time, 2 months into treatment, to ask whether I had thought about what would happen to my position at the firm if I needed extended leave, I was on my way home from an infusion session. I had been at the clinic for 6 hours. I answered your question. I told you I had spoken with my grandfather and my position was secure. I thanked you for calling. I paused. I billed 4,000 hours in my first 2 years at this firm, I said. I managed the Riverside Commons project while I was still in my first year, and I brought it in 11 days under schedule. I found the structural issue on Morrison Street, a load-bearing wall that had been repositioned in a revision without the corresponding structural update, and I flagged it and sat in 3 meetings to resolve it and redrew 6 sheets, and the client saved $387,000, and this firm avoided a professional liability claim that would have followed us for a decade. In the 2 years since, I developed the Nakamura Group contract, which is our largest active client, through a referral I built at a conference in Portland on my own time. I developed the Hendricks Development relationship from the Morrison Street project. I wrote the submission that brought in the Salinas County civic work. I looked at him. "You were not consulted on any of it," I said, "because none of it required your consultation. It required my time and my training and my attention and 6,000 hours of work that I showed up to do correctly, including during the months when showing up correctly was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life." My father's jaw was set. "You said I cut you out," I said. "And I want to be precise about this too because precision matters. I did not consult you on the apartment because you wanted to co-sign it, and your name on my lease was not something I was willing to give you. I did not go to Berkeley because I did not want to go to Berkeley. I wanted to go to Oregon, and I went to Oregon, and I did not do it to exclude you. I did it because it was the right program and the right fit, and it had nothing to do with you. I took the job at this firm because my grandfather offered it, and because I was qualified for it, and because architecture in Sacramento, working on mixed-use residential projects in the Central Valley, was exactly the work I wanted to do." A pause. "Every single one of those decisions," I said, "you experienced as a door being closed in your face. And every time I did not open the door, the story became that I was difficult. That I was the hard one. That I didn't appreciate what I had." I looked at my father across the 3 documents, across the white linen, across the ballroom that was still happening behind us. The band playing, the string lights staying beautiful and indifferent, 200 people finding reasons to look somewhere else. "I appreciate what I built," I said. "Every hour of it. That is not the same thing as gratitude for what you believe you gave me, and I am done pretending it is." My father looked at the documents. Then at me. Then at my grandfather, who had not moved, who was sitting with his hands folded on the table with the expression of a man who has waited a very long time for something and is watching it arrive. "You cannot cut your family out," my father said. One more time. Quieter than the others. The way a man says something when the repetition is not for the listener's benefit but for his own, when he needs to hear it in his own voice again to confirm that it is still real. "And then expect them to celebrate you," I said. He looked at me. "I heard you the first time," I said. "And the second. And I want to tell you something about that sentence, because you've said it 3 times tonight and I think you believe it's about me." The table was very quiet. Even the nearest tables, the ones that had stopped pretending, had gone still. "That sentence," I said, "is about you. It has always been about you. You built a story where the cutting out only moves in one direction, where the person who is excluding is always the one who took something, never the one who failed to earn it. And you said it 3 times because the truest things we believe are the ones we need to say out loud the most." My father looked at me with an expression I had spent 31 years trying to decode and had never quite managed, something that was almost, but not quite, recognition. The look of a man who is seeing a picture that has been in front of him for a long time and is only now resolving into its actual elements. "The cutting out was real," I said. "The direction of it is the part you got wrong." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. That surprised me. I had expected it to be uncomfortable. The silence after a true thing, in a room where the true thing had been resisted for a very long time, tends to be the kind of silence that needs filling. But this one didn't. It had the quality of something having been set down. My father looked at Claire Ashworth. "I want copies," he said. "Of course," she said. "I can have everything sent to counsel of your choosing by end of business Monday." "I want to know," he said, "what the grounds are for contesting the valuation." "That would be a conversation for your attorney," she said. "I represent Mr. Voss and Camila." He looked at my grandfather one more time. The look of a man who has been in a room for 30 years thinking he understood its dimensions and has just found a wall where he thought there was a door. 32 years, he said. And you never. I told you, my grandfather said. Every time you asked, I told you the firm was spoken for. You didn't believe me. You never said her name. No, my grandfather said. I didn't. Because it wasn't your information to have. My father picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He straightened it with both hands, the slow, deliberate motion of a man putting his presentation back on because it is the only thing he has left to put on. He looked at the 3 documents laid out on the white linen. The operating agreement. The Secretary of State confirmation. The valuation report. 3 objects in a line, each one a layer of the thing my grandfather had spent 32 years building and 3 years specifically preparing to show at this moment, in this room, to this man. 4.3 million, my father said. Not a question. Not a protest. Just the number said aloud, the way you say something when you need to hear it in your own voice to confirm that it is real. Yes, my grandfather said. My father looked at me. His face, finally, without any of the curtains or registers or calibrated expressions, just his face, a 58-year-old man at his daughter's wedding reception with 3 legal documents in front of him and 200 people in the room and the band playing something slow and beautiful 40 feet away. It should have been mine, he said. The words sat on the table with the documents. I looked at him, at his face which had lost its architecture, all the managed surfaces gone, just a man standing in a ballroom with his hands at his sides. I looked at him for a long moment. Not with pity. Not with triumph. With the specific, clear-eyed attention of a woman who has spent 31 years trying to see her father accurately and is finally, in this October light, looking at the thing itself. No, I said. It shouldn't have. He looked at me. It was built by one person, I said. Over 32 years. And then by 2 people over 6 more. You didn't build any of it. You weren't there for any of it. The fact that you're my father doesn't put your name on what other people made. I gave you. I know what you gave me, I said. I know exactly what you gave me, and I know what it cost, and I know what you thought it bought. He was quiet. It didn't buy the firm, I said. It didn't buy my marriage. It didn't buy the right to send Wade to the front of a room to say things you believed but couldn't say yourself. I paused. It didn't buy tonight. My father looked at Claire Ashworth. Then at the documents. Then, finally, at my grandfather, who had not moved from his chair, sitting with his hands folded on the table, watching his son-in-law with the patience of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a conversation to finish. My father picked up his jacket. He held it in one hand. This isn't finished, he said. To no one specifically. To the room. Monday, Claire said. Have your attorney call my office. He walked away from the table. Not quickly. My father never moved quickly in rooms where people were watching, but with the particular gait of a man who has made an exit and needs it to read as a departure rather than a retreat. I watched him cross the ballroom floor. Watched him reach my mother's table. Watched her look up at him and read his face and then look at her hands. He said something to her. Low enough that I couldn't hear. She stood up. She picked up her purse. She looked across the room at me one time. A look I put away to examine later, when I had the space for it, a look that was complicated in ways I didn't have the bandwidth for tonight, and then she followed my father toward the exit. Wade was already gone. I had not seen him leave. At some point between the toast and the confrontation he had simply stopped being present, which was something Wade did in rooms where the ground was shifting. He had a talent for identifying the moment before consequences and absenting himself from it. The door closed behind them. Colton was at my side before I had fully turned from watching the door. He didn't say anything immediately. He put his hand on my back, flat and warm between my shoulder blades, and stood beside me while I took 2 breaths and let the room recalibrate around us. The band was playing. The dance floor had people on it. The string lights above the ceiling beams were doing what they had been doing all night, being perfectly, persistently beautiful, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath them. Hey, Colton said. Hey, I said. You okay? I considered the question the way I had learned, over 14 months, to consider questions about how I was. Not dismissing them, not performing an answer, but actually checking. Running the actual inventory. The ballroom was warm. My dress was still on. The pearl clip was gone. It had left with the wig when Wade pulled it, and someone had set the wig on the table, and I had put it back on, and at some point in the last hour I had taken it off again and set it beside my clutch and had not put it back. I was standing in a ballroom full of people without it, and no one who mattered was looking at me with anything other than straightforward human warmth. Colton's hand was on my back. My grandfather was at the table near the door with Claire Ashworth, the two of them talking quietly, the documents stacked neatly in front of them. Everything in its right order. Yes, I said. Actually, yes. Colton looked at me carefully, the way he always looked at me when I said I was fine, checking the claim against the evidence, which was one of the things about him I had understood immediately and loved without reservation. He nodded once. Okay. I want to dance, I said. He blinked. Then he smiled, the wide one, the one that looked like it might hurt a little. Yeah. It's our wedding, I said. I want to dance at our wedding. He took my hand and led me to the dance floor. The band was playing something I recognized but couldn't name in the moment. One of those songs that exists in the register of feeling rather than memory, the kind you know without knowing you know it. Colton put his hand on my waist, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and we moved the way people move when they have been in each other's orbit long enough that the movement requires no negotiation. Your grandfather, Colton said after a moment. I know, I said. He drove 2 hours. I know. With a manila envelope. I know. I looked up at him. I put a copy of the agreement in my overnight bag. I've been looking at it since yesterday morning. Colton was quiet for a moment. Then, you knew he was coming? He told me he was going to be here, I said. He didn't tell me exactly what he'd bring. But you knew the firm was yours. Since October 3rd, I said. Colton absorbed this. I could feel him absorbing it. The way information reorganizes itself across a body when it is integrating something that changes the shape of what it thought it already knew. And you said nothing. You didn't ask, I said. My father didn't ask either. He went around me, through Gerald Harlan's son, through the informal assessment, through Wade's toast tonight. All around me. If he had asked me directly, I would have told him directly. Colton looked at me. Would you? Yes, I said. I had no reason not to. The documents are filed. The filing is public record. There was nothing to hide. I paused. He didn't want to know. He wanted to find out. Those are different things. Colton nodded slowly. We turned on the dance floor, and I caught a glimpse, over his shoulder, of my grandfather at the table near the door, still talking with Claire, the charcoal jacket, the white hair, the particular quality of stillness he carried that I had known my whole life. The stillness of a man who has done what he came to do and is content to wait out the evening in the company of someone he respects. Across the room, Douglas Reeve, Colton's father, was standing near the bar with 2 glasses of something, and he caught my eye and raised one of the glasses in a small, deliberate gesture. Not a toast. Something more private than that. I raised my chin at him and he nodded, and that was all, and it was enough. Your dad called me, Colton said. Before the wedding. About a month ago. I looked at him. He wanted to know, Colton said carefully, whether I had thought through the financial implications of the marriage, given the firm. Given what might happen if I didn't stay in remission, I said. Yes. I was quiet for a moment. The band moved into the next phrase of whatever it was playing, and we moved with it. What did you say? I said that Camila's health was not a financial variable, Colton said. And that the firm was hers, and whatever happened to it was her decision, and that I wasn't a party to that conversation. He paused. He said I was being naive about how families work. What did you say to that? I said I was pretty sure I understood how families work, Colton said. And then I ended the call. I kept my hand on his shoulder and my feet moving on the dance floor, and I said nothing for a long moment. You didn't tell me, I said. No, he said. I thought about it. I decided it wasn't something you needed to carry going into the wedding. I was going to tell you afterward. This qualifies as afterward, I said. It does, he agreed. I exhaled, a long, slow breath, the kind that empties out something that has been held too long. Thank you, I said, for how you handled it. I married you, he said simply. The handling was obvious. Junie found me 20 minutes later, during a gap between songs, while Colton had been pulled aside by his father, Douglas Reeve, who shook his son's hand and then did something I hadn't seen him do before. Pulled him into a brief, solid embrace that lasted 3 seconds and said everything Douglas Reeve probably didn't have words for. Junie appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of water and handed me one and stood beside me without making it into anything. That, she said, was the most dramatic wedding I have ever attended, and I was at the Kowalski-Fernandez wedding in 2019 where the flower girl released live butterflies directly into the wedding cake. I laughed. The real kind, from the chest, the kind that starts before you decide to let it. Are you actually okay? She said. Same question as Colton, different frequency. Junie's version came with the specific quality of attention that had been calibrated by 3 years of sitting with me through the hard parts. Not sitting with me in the therapeutic sense, not performing support, just being there, actually there, in the unspectacular and necessary way. I think so, I said. Ask me again in a week. Weekly check-ins, she said. Noted. She sipped her water. Your grandfather. I know. He planned that. For 3 years, I said. At least. Junie was quiet for a moment. He chose tonight because of what Wade did. He chose tonight, I said, because Wade did what my father told him to do, in front of 200 people, at a moment when my father thought I was distracted. When he thought the evening was his. I looked at my water glass, the light catching it, the way it held the room in its surface. My grandfather was waiting for the moment my father stopped calculating and just acted. Because that is when you see the real thing. That is when there is no argument left about interpretation. The nod, Junie said. The nod, I said. In front of 200 people. My grandfather had been standing in the doorway for about 90 seconds before my father saw him. Long enough. Junie nodded slowly. She looked across the room toward where my grandfather was now standing near the edge of the dance floor, talking with Waverly, who was making him laugh. Actually laugh, the real version, the one that reaches the eyes. He loves you, Junie said. I know, I said. The way that takes 32 years to show up properly, she said. That's a specific kind of love. It is, I said. We stood together in the comfortable quiet that exists between people who have been through enough real things that they don't need to fill every pause, and I watched the room. My wedding, my room, my people, still here, still going, the band and the dance floor and the string lights doing their indifferent beautiful work, and I let the evening be what it still was, which was mine. My grandfather found me near the edge of the dance floor at 9:45, when the evening had settled into its later rhythms. The dancing more relaxed, the tables down to their last drinks, the band into the slow, easy part of the night that signals a gathering approaching its natural close. He was still carrying himself with the same unhurried solidity he'd carried since he walked in, but I could see, now that the room had quieted, that he was tired. 73 years old, and he had driven 2 hours, and he had held that envelope through everything that happened, and he had sat across a table from my father for the better part of 40 minutes without flinching once. Tired was the correct response. I took his arm. We stood at the edge of the room and watched the dance floor together. How long did you know he would do something tonight? I said. I didn't know, he said. I hoped he wouldn't. But I prepared for the case that he would. He was quiet for a moment. Wade called me in August. I looked at him. He called to tell me, my grandfather said, that the family felt I was making a mistake with the succession. That is how he put it, the family feels. He wanted me to understand that there were other ways to structure the ownership transition that would be, he paused, choosing the word precisely, more reflective of everyone's contributions. Wade has never contributed. I know, my grandfather said. That is how I knew it was your father's call, not Wade's. Wade doesn't think in structures. He thinks in grievances. He paused. That call told me your father had decided this was the year. That he was going to make a move at whatever family event presented itself. I decided the event was going to be on my terms. I was quiet for a moment. Below the quiet, something was moving. Not quite emotion, not quite thought. The thing that happens when you understand the full shape of something that has been happening around you for years, all its preparation and patience and love, and you see it completely for the first time. You drove 2 hours, I said. You drove 2 hours to Stockton for my 71st birthday, he said. While you were in your second treatment cycle and the drive made you sick. That was different. It wasn't, he said. I took his hand and held it, standing at the edge of the dance floor, while the band played something old and slow and the string lights stayed the way they had been all night. Beautiful, indifferent, perfectly themselves. The documents, I said after a while. Claire will have everything filed. Everything is already filed, he said. The documents tonight were for your father's benefit. The record is already on record. He looked at me. It has been on record since October 3rd. There is nothing left to file. He said it isn't finished. He can say that, my grandfather said. His attorney will tell him what finishing it looks like, practically speaking. Claire is thorough. He paused. It will not go anywhere. The record of your contribution to this firm is extensive. I have been keeping notes for a long time. I know, I said. I know you know, he said. I want you to know that I know you know. I laughed, the quiet version, the one that doesn't need an audience. We stood together a little longer, watching Colton on the dance floor with Waverly, both of them laughing at something, the wide, unguarded version, the kind that happens when a night has been too big and too strange and you have arrived at the other side of it intact and you need to let some of the tension out through the simplest possible channel. Go back to your husband, my grandfather said. This part is over. Are you driving back tonight? In the morning, he said. I have a room down the hall. Your Colton arranged it. He looked at me with the expression that was not quite pride because pride implied surprise and he had not been surprised. It was something steadier than pride. He is a good man. He is, I said. My grandfather squeezed my hand once. Then he let it go. Colton's mother found me at 10:15, while Colton was on the dance floor with Waverly. Both of them laughing, unguarded, the kind of laughter that happens at the far end of a night that has been too large. Diane Reeves sat down beside me at the table where I had retreated with my water and my clutch, and she looked at me with the directness that I had come to understand was simply how she operated. No performance, no management, just the thing. I want to say something, she said. Okay, I said. What happened tonight, the toast and what Wade did, that was wrong. Obviously wrong. You know that, I know that, everyone in this room knows that. She folded her hands on the table. But I want to say something specific, not about them. I waited. You put that wig back on, she said. After. While they were all still sitting there. You reached over and you picked it up and you put it back on and you didn't look at anyone while you did it. You looked at my son. She paused. And then, an hour later, you took it off and you didn't put it back. She looked at me. I've been watching people manage hard things for a long time, she said. And that sequence was one of the bravest things I have ever seen. I looked at the table. Something cracked briefly in my chest. Not breaking, cracking the way ice cracks when it is thawing, the specific sound of something rigid beginning to release. I let it happen. I didn't fill the space around it with words. Thank you, I said when I could say it evenly. You're my daughter now, Diane said. That is the only other thing I wanted to say. We sat together for a moment, just the two of us at the table at the edge of a wedding that had been too many things at once, and I let that sentence be what it was, which was simple and true and entirely sufficient. The evening found its natural close around 11. The band played its last song, something slow and old and slightly too romantic for a room full of people at different stages of emotional exhaustion, which made it exactly right. People gathered their things. There were embraces in the lobby, by the coat check, in the parking lot where the October air had gone properly cold. Darius hugged me for a long time and didn't say anything, which was the right call. Rosamund pressed the pearl clip into my hand. She had found it, she said, under the centerpiece, and said simply, "Keep this one." Waverly kissed both my cheeks, European grandmother style, and told me she would call Monday. My grandfather left at 10:45 before the formal close, moving through the lobby with the same unhurried solidity and the leather portfolio tucked under Claire Ashworth's arm and the manila envelope in his own hand. Going back the way he had come, quietly, having done what he came to do. I watched him go. Colton took my hand in the elevator. We were both quiet in the way of people who have said everything that needed saying and are content, now, in the silence. In the hotel room, the curtains were open. Someone had opened them while we were at the reception, a hotel thing, the turn-down service, and the Sacramento night was doing what Sacramento nights do in October, which is to be clear and cool and lit along the edges by the city's particular amber. The American River sound came through the cracked window, the same low rush it had carried that morning when I had woken at 4:53 and pressed my palm to my sternum and counted to 10. I sat down in the chair by the window. Colton sat on the edge of the bed. For a long time, neither of us said anything. "Your dad nodded," Colton finally said. "Yes," I said. "I saw it." "I know you did." "I want to say something about that," he said, "and then I want to not talk about your family for the rest of the night, if that's all right." "That's all right," I said. "I am going to be angry about that nod," he said, "for a very long time. Not tonight. But for a long time." "Okay," I said. "That's all," he said. "That's the thing." I looked at him across the quiet hotel room, across the October night and the river sound and the specific, uncomplicated fact of being married to someone who says what he means and means what he says. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," he said. "Go to sleep." I didn't go to sleep immediately. I sat in the chair by the window for a while longer, looking at the Sacramento sky, the October light, the river sound, the amber edges of the city continuing its ordinary business below, indifferent and constant, the way cities are when they do not know what has happened inside their rooms and would not particularly adjust their behavior if they did. I thought about the manila envelope on my nightstand. I thought about the folder in the second drawer of the lateral filing cabinet, the one my grandfather had taken out 3.5 years ago and held for 10 seconds and slid back in. I thought about the word remission and what it had felt like to hear it. Not relief exactly, because relief implies that the absence of a thing erases the experience of it, which it doesn't. Something more like, and now you continue. The next thing. The return to the work. I thought about Morrison Street, standing somewhere in Midtown with its structural issue correctly resolved before it ever became a problem. I thought about the Nakamura Group contract and the conference in Portland and the moment I had introduced myself to the right person in the lobby of the right hotel on my own time and said simply, "I'm Camila Torres, I'm an architect at Harlan & Voss in Sacramento, and I think we might be working on compatible problems." I thought about what my grandfather had said in his office the first night. "You have billed 4,000 hours in 2 years. You have managed 3 projects. You found the issue on Morrison Street. Not you are talented or you have potential or any of the words that are about what a person might become. What you did. What already happened. The record that already exists." I thought about my father's face when Claire had read the valuation aloud. 4.3 million. Not a question. The number said in his own voice to confirm that it was real. And then, it should have been mine. I had said no, and I had meant no, and I meant it still, sitting in the chair by the window in the quiet of the hotel room with the river sound coming through the cracked window and Colton breathing steadily from the bed behind me. No, it shouldn't have. It was built by someone who showed up for it, and then by 2 people who showed up for it, and the fact of blood does not put your name on what other people made. My father had been saying for 30 years that the family was owed a share of what my grandfather built. But families are not owed shares of what individual people build inside them. Children are not assets that appreciate and return dividends on a parent's investment in their upbringing. A daughter's architecture firm is not a family annuity. The confusion of those categories, the treatment of love as a transaction, of presence as a down payment, of proximity as a form of ownership, was the engine of everything that had happened tonight, and I had watched it run for 31 years, and I could see it clearly now from the outside, in the quiet of the room, in a way that I had not always been able to see it clearly from inside it. The cutting out had been real. The direction of it was the part he had gotten wrong. My father called at 11:30 the next morning. I was in the hotel room with Colton, both of us in the slow, comfortable space of a morning after a night that had been too large to process in sequence. Coffee from the cart, the curtains open, the river sound and the Sacramento October doing what October did. I looked at the phone. Then at Colton. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," I said. I answered it. My father's voice was different from the night before. Not soft, but flattened, the registers gone, just his actual voice without the management layered over it. He sounded the way very tired people sound when they have stopped performing. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said. About the calls." I waited. "About not asking how you were," he said. "During the treatment." I held the phone. "I don't have," he stopped. Started again. "I don't have a good answer for that." I told myself I was focused on the practical things. I told myself that practical things were how I showed up for people. A pause. "But you were right that I didn't ask." "No," I said. "You didn't. I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to be fine with everything. Last night." He stopped again. "Wade should not have done that. I should not have," a long pause. "I should not have nodded." It was the closest my father had come, in 31 years, to saying that a specific thing he had done was wrong. Not Wade was out of line, not your mother was caught off guard, but I should not have nodded. A small, specific admission about a small, specific action. I knew it was not the beginning of a transformation. I had lived with this man for too long to mistake a single phone call for a reorientation. The attorney was still going to get a call Monday morning. There would still be, at some level, some formulation of a contest or a repositioning, because that was how my father moved through the world, and one night in a ballroom with 3 legal documents was not going to change the fundamental mechanics of it. But he had said I should not have nodded. And he had said it at 11:30 in the morning, sober, in his actual voice. "I hear you," I said. "Camila." "We're not fixed," I said. "I want to be honest about that. We're not fixed, and I don't know what we are, and I can't tell you what this looks like going forward. But I hear what you said." A long silence. "Okay," my father said. "Okay," I said. I ended the call. Colton was watching me from across the room. I set the phone down on the table and looked at the window. The Sacramento sky, the October light, the river sound continuing below it, the same as it had been the morning before and all the mornings before that. "Well," Colton said. "He said he shouldn't have nodded," I said. Colton was quiet for a moment. "That's something." "It's something," I said. "It's not everything." "No," he said. "But it's something." I picked up my coffee. I sat down in the chair by the window. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in the morning, continuing, indifferent and constant, regardless of what had happened the night before in any of its rooms. I thought about Claire Ashworth, who would be at her desk Monday morning when my father's attorney called, with everything prepared and in order. I thought about the 3 documents, stacked neatly on the white linen before she had put them back in the portfolio, the operating agreement, the Secretary of State confirmation, the valuation report. I thought about the number. $4.3 million, with a project pipeline carrying approximately $1.1 million in contracted future revenue. I thought about the Morrison Street building in Midtown Sacramento, standing with its structural issue correctly resolved before it ever became a problem, $400,000 of client money saved by a woman who had noticed something and said something and been right. I thought about the last 14 months. The hospital waiting rooms and the treatment schedules and the insurance calls and the particular exhaustion of being seriously ill in a country that treats serious illness as an administrative inconvenience until proven otherwise. Colton sitting in the chair beside my bed during the hardest infusion sessions with his laptop open, pretending to work and not working at all, just being present, which was the only thing that mattered in those hours and which he understood without being told. Junie driving from Portland without being asked, arriving on a Thursday with groceries and the specific gift of not making it into something larger than it was. My grandfather calling every Sunday, not asking about the firm, just talking about Sacramento, about a project, about something he had read, normal conversation in an abnormal time, the gift of being treated as a person rather than a patient. And my father calling 11 times to ask about the firm. Not unkindness, exactly. Something more complicated than unkindness. A man who had decided somewhere along the way that practical things were love, and that access was the same as presence, and that a daughter's professional life was a family asset rather than a person's own work. Who had spent 32 years circling something that was never his and had convinced himself, through the sheer duration of the circling, that duration was a form of claim. The cutting out had been real. The direction of it was the part he had gotten wrong. 3 things I want you to carry from this story. 1. What you build with your hands, the hours billed, the problems found and solved, the calls returned, the work done correctly when no one is watching and the only record is the work itself, does not disappear because someone with a louder claim decides they deserve it more. Records exist. Documents exist. The work itself exists. And the people who watched you do it remember. 2. Preparation is a form of love. My grandfather spent 3 years making sure that when the moment came, there was no argument left to have, not because he wanted a confrontation, but because he wanted the confrontation to be brief. He could not protect me from my family. He could make sure they ran out of ground to stand on. That is what he spent 32 years doing, and 3 more doing deliberately, and it is the most patient and practical expression of love I have ever been given. 3. Bravery at a wedding is not walking down the aisle. Sometimes it is reaching across a table for a wig that someone pulled off your head, setting it back on in front of 200 people, and continuing to eat your dinner. And sometimes, an hour later, it is deciding that you are done performing normalcy for the people who made the normalcy necessary, and taking it off and sitting in your own skin, in a lit-up room full of people who love you and staying anyway. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If any part of this reminded you of your own experience, the quiet work that went unrecognized, the room where someone finally said enough, the morning after when you didn't know yet what came next, tell me where you're watching from. That's where part 2 begins.